Hi there, and welcome back to Toxic Bliss, Surviving Narcissism, with me, Awen Reese. That last episode, man, that one was rough for me. I remember that day at the train station as if it were happening right this very minute. Standing there watching that train leave is imprinted on my memory for all time, as is the pain that I felt in that moment. Although I'm able now to relive moments like that without feeling the pain acutely, it still brings about a sort of melancholy, however short-lived. There is also an inner voice that I have to work very hard to keep silent, a voice that says things like, "Well, of course he wasn't coming back, you dingus. And why did you even follow him to the train station? Why didn't you just throw a party that he was finally gone?" Current me and back then me are two very different people. Anything that anyone could possibly think of saying to me after hearing the podcast is no worse than anything I've already said to myself. I have a hard time accepting that back then me was really that dumb. The further removed from that time in my life that I become, the harsher I can be with myself. I no longer can summon those feelings of love and bliss and desire that I felt for Mike as I could even a few years ago. I can no longer think back on him and feel much of anything at all. All of the positive feelings are gone or muted, but along with them went the negative ones as well. Right now it's more of a gentle numb, as if it all just turned to dust, and I can see a faint mirage of what was once there. This relatively new feeling of detachment allows me to revisit the events and tell the story, which is great. But it also allows me to look upon my own behavior and see the level of dysfunction that I was displaying at the time. I have to be mindful of not being too hard on myself. I can temper that by remembering all the years of healing that I've done and appreciating the woman I grew up to be. And besides, he was mean enough. I don't need to pile on and add more negativity to the mix. I just have to look at back then me and give her a hug and say, "Hang in there, it will get better." And that's exactly what I was doing for a few days after the train station and phone calls. I tried to put on a brave face for Maggie's sake, but I often found myself in the bathroom with the sink running to hide the sound of my crying from her. For the first few days, things were pretty rough. I was completely panicked now. How was I going to have this baby alone? How was I going to handle a newborn and Maggie at the same time without him with me? I began to have some pretty dark thoughts and feelings, and was at least aware enough to discuss them with my doctor right away. She put me on some antidepressants to help me get through the worst of things, and yes, they did complicate the pregnancy a bit, but better than the alternative for sure. I also reached out to my bestest friend in the whole world, whom I had lost contact with after the big Florida move. I called her one day, crying so hard that I could barely catch my breath, and I told her the story. Or, well, I managed to get out a few words, at least. She realized that it was in some kind of crazy crisis, and she came right over. I cried and sobbed and wiped snot on my sleeve as I tried to get the story out, and she just sat there listening and holding my hand and letting me know that I wasn't alone. I was such a mess that she packed a bag for Maggie and one for me and took us back to her house with her. She just didn't feel comfortable leaving me alone, as I was apparently as unfunctional as one could get. We stayed with her for the weekend, and on Sunday morning she convinced me to go to church with her. I managed to take a shower and get dressed and even brushed my hair. It was a miracle. She got Maggie ready, and we headed out. Now, I wasn't a religious type person at all, so church was the very last thing I had thought of as a way to deal with all these feelings. And I wasn't really thrilled about going, but I figured it couldn't hurt, and hey, we'd go out to breakfast afterwards, and that part would be fun. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually eaten anything. And I was all right, meaning I was able to speak English and not cry, until the service started. This was a very modern church, with a sound system and a live band and TV screens, and it all felt so not very religious, if that makes sense. We kind of just wanted it to be over with so we could leave. But once the pastor started talking, and some gentle music was playing in the background, something came over me. This was one of the most powerful feelings that I've ever had in my life, and I'm going to try to explain it here, but I don't think I can do it justice. I suddenly felt as though I was an infant being cradled in two giant hands. I was safe, I was home, I was okay, and everything was okay, and I was absolutely not alone. This feeling was a physical manifestation of hope. I genuinely cannot find the right words to articulate it clearly. I leaned over and put my head in my hands and cried harder than I've ever cried before or since. And that was saying something after the last year and a half. But I was suddenly removed from everything that had happened in my entire life. I felt as though that was some sort of movie that I had seen, and now I was out in the bright sunshine, and everything was new and good and perfectly as it should be. I felt so utterly protected, healed, forgiven, and loved. All of these feelings flooding through me at once, and I was overcome. I have absolutely no idea what the service was about. What songs were sung, who spoke, what they said, nothing. I was not there. It was as close to an out-of-body experience as I have ever heard described. I remember Vicky putting her hand on my shoulder and telling me it was over and time to go. And as soon as I felt her touch, I sat upright and the tears just stopped, just like that. I was incredibly disoriented for a few minutes. I looked at her and Maggie and all the people who were filing out of their seats toward the door, and I could not remember where we were or how I had even gotten there. Vicky just rubbed my back for a minute and said, "Take your time," as if she knew exactly what was going on with me. Eventually, we made it out to the car, and she just said, "Whenever you're ready." And I shook my head at her and said, "I don't know what that was, but I'm okay. Like, everything is okay now. Oh my God." And she laughed and said, "Yeah, exactly." And it was true. Everything from that moment on was okay. I was done crying. I was done worrying, done with the fear and the sorrow and the pain. Now, I can't sit here and say that the hand of God descended upon me and healed me that day, but I can't say that it didn't either. I'm still not a very religious person. I do believe in a higher being of some sort, and well, that's all I can attribute that day to. She brought us home after breakfast, and I had a renewed sense of purpose. I got the apartment all cleaned up, and I did some laundry and made a nice dinner for me and Maggie. I even called my mom and asked her to come over and eat with us. She was thrilled that I seemed to have pulled myself back together. I also didn't take the antidepressants that my doctor had prescribed, and I made a note to call her in the morning to make sure that was okay. I slept great that night, on the couch, without feeling the least bit of guilt for once. The next day I got Maggie off to school and went out to do a little shopping. I wanted a plant or two for the apartment, something living and fresh and vibrant. I also wanted to go to the library, which was just across the parking lot behind the building I lived in, and find a good story to get lost in for a while. I walked across the street to the bank to get a little cash out of the ATM so I could get some plants. But the ATM wouldn't give me any money. I went inside to ask a banker and see what was wrong with my ATM card, and she said the card was fine. The bank account just had a zero balance. "A what?" I said. "A zero balance, sorry," she repeated. "How?" I asked, not able to make any other words. She looked over to the account and said that the last transaction was a check that was cashed in the amount of $500 made out to Mike. I stood there silently looking at her for a moment and said, "I need a copy of that check, please." And she went off to get it for me. Now, I know full well that Mike didn't have access to my bank account. He had never wanted joint bank accounts because he wanted to hide all of his money away, so I figured, well, that's good enough for me too then, isn't it? But a check? I had never written him a check from this account, never. When she handed me the printed copy, I saw that indeed he had just taken a check from my purse and written it to himself and cashed it before he left. I asked to speak to a bank manager. When I went into his office, I showed him the printout and asked him to verify that that was my signature on file. It took him a minute to bring up my signature card, and he checked it and said that it didn't appear to be. "Right," I said. "So how was the check cashed then?" I asked with cold fierceness. Someone was going to pay for this, and since I couldn't reach Mike, the bank was the next likely target. He said he wasn't sure, but If I felt there had been an error, I could file a complaint form and blah blah blah. I want that money put back into my account before I leave this room, I said. But of course they couldn't do that. I would have to file a police report and take the matter to court. There was nothing he could do for me, and he was so sorry, blah blah blah. I was furious, beyond furious. Thankfully, the bank was right next to the town hall, which housed the local police department. I filed my report with them and gave them all the info I had on Mike. They said that they would file the papers, but it wasn't likely that they would recover any money, but I could press charges and sue him in court. Useless garbage. The money was gone. Mike was in another state, and I was just out of luck. The police seemed more sorry for me than the bank did, but that did me no good, as I was now worse than broke. My rent check still hadn't cleared the bank, and that was about to bounce. Yay! I had to go home without any plants, and I didn't feel like getting any books anymore, because I had to call my mother. There was nothing else that I could do. I rang her, and I explained what had happened, and she yelled. A lot. But she did eventually agree to cover my rent check for me and help me get some food into the house. She made a list of things that she'd like to do to Mike that would have made Ted Bundy blush, and I wished her all the luck in the world in her endeavors. I was also really angry that this had detracted somewhat from that hopeful, peaceful feeling that I had from church. I wanted that feeling back. No way was I going to let this butthead take that from me, too. I called Vicky and made arrangements to go back to church with her that coming Sunday. She also offered to help with groceries and things if we needed. She was the best. I don't know what I did to deserve a friend like her, but I was awfully glad I had her. We're going to pause here for a short break, and in the next part, let's see what happens when I go back to church and if I can reclaim my hopeful, peaceful state. Welcome back. The week went by calmly after that morning. My doctor was pleased that I didn't feel the need for the medication, but told me to keep it on hand and call her right away if things changed. I would be seeing her the following week anyway. As this was a high-risk pregnancy, I had to go see her every other week until I was closer to my delivery date. That weekend, Vicky picked us up on Saturday, and we spent the night at her house. This was such a great escape from everything, because Vicky and I were very close friends, and it just felt like being at home with her, and her kids and Maggie got along perfectly. It was healing and good. We went to church Sunday morning, and I had the same experience, although this time it was without the dissociation effect. I cried hard and deep, but it was a healing, purging cry, and I felt so good after the service. Was it always like this? I mean, no wonder people liked going to church. Wow. Vicky laughed and assured me that no, this was not a normal, everyday reaction to church, but it was something much bigger and deeper than we could really understand. I didn't care too much to try and label or define the experience. It was what it was, and it was good. Life continued onward. I got the financial mess sorted out, and Maggie was going to school, and I was getting more pregnant every day. I had some moments that were rough, and these happened mostly whenever I would start thinking about giving birth without Mike with me. I fixated on that a lot. The idea of having a baby without being with the father, that just killed me for some reason. And whenever I started feeling down or getting worried about something, I'd use music and housework to get myself out of it. I listened to a lot of Tori Amos, of course, but also that album Mad Season by Matchbox 20. So many of the songs on that album seemed to fit my predicament, and I listened to it over and over and over. April had arrived, and spring was bursting to life. I was spending more time outside and enjoying the warmth and the sun and the smell of the air. Something about spring in Connecticut just really sang to me. I was feeling happy and hopeful, and in just a few months, I would have this new little guy to love and care for, and I couldn't wait to meet him. I got Maggie onto the school bus one morning and climbed back up the monster stairs to get to my apartment. The stairs were getting more and more challenging as I was getting more pregnant, but I made it. The phone was ringing when I got to the door, and I rushed to open it and answer it before they hung up. "Hello?" I answered breathlessly. "Hi, baby!" It was Mike. Oh, dear. I hadn't talked to him since that nasty phone call back in February. I didn't want to talk to him. I wished it had taken me a few seconds longer to climb the monster stairs, because maybe then I would have missed the call. "Mike?" I asked. "Why are you calling me?" "What do you mean, why am I calling you? I'm done with my classes now. I wanted to see if you missed me." Again with that sing-songy fake voice he used when he was trying to persuade. "Your classes should have been finished back in February. And are you forgetting the last time we talked?" I asked. "Oh, that," he said. "I was just stressed out, that's all." I stayed silent. "Oh, guess what? I have a job. I've been working at McDonald's down here so I could save up some money." "Speaking of money," I said, "you drained my bank account before you left." "Oh, well, that was my money," he said. "I had given you almost $600 that month, and I needed it back to go to Florida." The rage that was building up inside of me threatened to escape in the form of a magical lightning bolt that would travel from my phone through the wires and out the end of his phone and annihilate him. I wondered for a moment if that was possible. Energy and electrons, maybe it was. "Are you there?" he asked. "Yes," I said, irritated. I was frustrated that he interrupted my thought process and my attempts to use psychic energy to electrocute him through the phone. "What do you want, Mike?" I asked. "Well, isn't that obvious? I want to come home. I told you I'd be there when the baby's born. I've always told you I'd never leave you alone and I'd be there for you. It's getting close now." "That's not an option," I said. "Why? Are you dating someone?" he accused. "Are you cheating on me? Don't you want me with you?" I just let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Anyway, I'm ready to leave here, and I even bought my own train ticket this time. Ha ha!" "Wait, you already bought a ticket?" I asked nervously. "Well, of course I did. I can't wait to see you again. I'm leaving in a few hours." "Mike, no, that's not a good idea," I started, but he interrupted. "Oh, here comes Tina. I gotta go. Love you. See you soon." Click. Aw, hell. I sat in stunned silence for what felt like a solid hour. I wasn't sure what to do. My brain was once again split in two distinctly different reactions. Two different people, and they were arguing with each other. Of course I didn't want Mike to come back. "Don't be silly. Of course you do want him back." "No, I really don't." "Yes, you really do." On and on it went. How was it that he always knew when I was just about over him and ready to move on? Since our days way back on AOL, he had an uncanny sixth sense about it. One of the narcissist superpowers of doom. The second they feel you hesitating or waking up from your hypnosis, they pounce, and they pounce hard. I didn't want to go back this time. I didn't want more of that drug. Single parenthood was rough, but it was so much better than the alternative with him. I knew this, and I knew he would destroy me eventually. But even knowing this, there was still a part of me that couldn't wait to see him again. I had now witnessed and experienced all the phases of a narcissistic relationship. It begins with targeting. Mike had pegged me as an easy or even a willing victim. People like me who wear their heart on their sleeves and always try to see the good in everyone generally make good targets. I was naive to the existence of creatures like him and fully believed his stories, his victimhood, his terrible misfortune. Once Mike had established that I was indeed the right kind of target for him, he began the love bombing or hoovering phase. He would lavish me with love and attention, but more insidiously, it was the mirroring. Narcissists are very good at learning what makes you tick, what things are important to you, things you like and hate, and this can range the full gamut of possibilities from your political stance, your religious beliefs, parenting philosophies, and more. They pick up on your tiniest clues and then mirror those thoughts and ideals back to you as if they are their own. When you fall in love with a narcissist, you aren't actually falling for them. You're falling in love with yourself. You really are a great person. Once you've fallen fully for them, they can start to get bored. One thing I noticed about Mike was that he was only ever happy in the earliest stages of a relationship, the infatuation stage. The first few weeks of any new relationship are heady and they're rife with happy chemicals flooding your brain. This usually fades after a month or so, and people settle into a more normal and comfortable routine. For Mike, that shift to normal meant the end. It wouldn't be long before he was scooping up his next target and keeping them on the back burner. This is when the devaluing stage would begin. He would become antsy and easily irritated by little things. He would use any opportunity to make me feel bad about myself. It felt like he was pushing me away, and the second that I'd pick up on that and react, he would go back to love bombing again for a few days or a week or so, and once it appeared that I had been lulled back into his web, there would be more devaluing. This was the endless seesaw that becomes normal for the duration of the relationship. Until one day, when the narcissist is ready to move on, they need a new source of their drug, a new supply. Many times, this was accomplished via online flings with women all over the place. He would begin with them the way he had begun with me. He would tell them stories about me and how crazy I was and that we were just roommates. And when his need for new supply had reached critical mass, he'd drop me like a hot potato and move on to whoever the new person was. At this point in the story, that new person was an old person. It was Tina. Shortly after he had come to Connecticut, he'd started talking to her again behind my back and making plans to go back to Florida. I was right when I had heard him say sucker on the phone to her. She thought we had ended things already, and he couldn't wait to get back home to her and try again. This lasted for a few months until he ran out of supply from Tina. So what did he do? He called me. He had been bouncing back and forth between us since the day I met him online. The ease in which he could execute the discard was astounding. He would just go cold and unfeeling and leave without looking back. Narcissists do not feel remorse. They do not care how they make you feel. They only manipulate your emotions so that they can get what they want out of you. And once they moved on to their next target, you mean nothing to them. Nothing at all, except possibly that you're a potential resupply when their new target kicks them to the curb. A narcissist like Mike will always have multiple relationships on the back burners. Always. Make no mistake about this. If your significant other is a malignant narcissist, there is another person in their orbit somewhere. So, target, love bomb, devalue, and discard. Those stages would repeat over and over and over again. If I had only known then what I know now, I could have spotted the pattern and stopped it. But I had no idea that such evil existed in the world, and I believed that I must be the one with the problem. I wasn't loving him good enough. I wasn't good enough, period, and I could fix that. In the next episode, we'll see if Mike makes his return trip, or if my common sense brain kicks the snot out of my codependent brain and stops him from getting on that train. Until then, thank you for listening, and take care.
People ask me what my secret